The city was too quiet that winter morning. The kind of quiet that feels like a warning, not peace. Snow curled through the frozen air as Denver held its breath. At the forest's edge, Emily Carter, wrapped in her striking red coat, stood motionless, a lone flame against a world of white, sensing something was terribly wrong. Beside her, the three snow puppies she had rescued on a stormy night now towered like young phantoms, silent, sharp, and watchful, their amber eyes burning like embers beneath the winter sun. For months, Emily had ignored the truth they tried to show her. But today, winter refused to stay silent. A low, ancient howl drifted out of the forest, colder than the snow itself. The three creatures pressed against her legs, not like pets, but like sentinels caught between two worlds, waiting for her to understand what they had always been. Emily swallowed hard, finally speaking for the first time since the night she realized they were never dogs at all, and her trembling words made the frozen forest hold its breath. If this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe and follow our journey. Denver lay buried beneath a merciless winter the night everything changed, its tall glass towers dimmed by thick snowfall, its streets muffled under white layers that swallowed sound and light alike. Wind swept through the city in long, hollow breaths, rattling street signs and leaving a thin frost over every surface. Far from downtown's glittering skyline, the eastern outskirts stretched into quiet, frozen roads where few cars dared to travel. Street lamps flickered weakly, losing their glow to the swirling storm. It was along one of these lonely routes that Emily Carter guided her crimson SUV home, the engine humming steadily under her hands as snow spiraled across her windshield. Emily, a self-made millionaire in her early 30s, was the kind of woman who seemed sculpted for attention. Tall, with a graceful, athletic build enhanced by years of disciplined exercise, long, dark hair cascading in waves that contrasted sharply with her flawless, pale skin, and full lips often curved in a confident, camera-ready smile. Tonight, however, she looked more like a crimson spark in a world gone white. She wore a luxurious red wool dress beneath a matching tailored coat, its belt cinched snugly around her narrow waist. Her makeup had smudged from the long day, but even then she exuded the effortless elegance of a woman who belonged in penthouses and magazine covers, not in the middle of a blizzard. Emily had never considered herself maternal. Friends joked she was better with expensive handbags than anything fragile or alive. But even she felt a strange tightness in her chest as she drove through the storm. The city felt too silent, too still, as if waiting for something. She brushed off the unease with a soft hum and turned up the heater. Then something small flashed across her headlights. Emily slammed the brakes, her heart jolting as the vehicle skidded lightly on the icy road. She squinted through the swirling white. At first, she thought it was debris tossed by the wind, but then she saw movement. A small, trembling shape curled near the base of a snowbank, and beside it, two more. Intrigued despite herself, Emily pushed open her door, and the cold stabbed her like 1,000 needles. She wrapped her red coat tighter and trudged through the wind. As she approached, the shapes resolved into three tiny creatures, each no bigger than her gloved hands. They shivered violently, their damp fur clumped with ice crystals. Their ears were folded down, their bodies pressed tightly together as if trying to survive by sheer closeness. They looked like puppies, tiny, fragile, impossibly helpless. Yet there was something almost unreal about how small and weightless they appeared. Emily knelt, snow soaking the hem of her dress. "Oh my God, you poor things!" She lifted the first one, startled by how light it felt, like holding a tuft of shadow rather than a living animal. The second whimpered faintly when touched, and the third blinked weakly with eyes barely open. Emily bit her lip, torn between disbelief and panic. She'd never cared for animals, had no idea what she was supposed to do, but leaving them here wasn't an option, not when the cold felt sharp enough to freeze breath itself. Muttering a curse at the storm, she gathered all three against her chest and rushed back to the SUV. Inside, she laid them gently on the heated seat, wrapping them in the red emergency blanket she kept for travel. Their tiny bodies trembled against the warmth, and she found herself whispering reassurances she didn't fully understand. "It's okay. I've got you now. Hang in there." At her penthouse, Emily carried them inside like three tiny fragments of winter. The luxury interior, sleek stone floors, glass walls, and soft golden lighting seemed far too pristine for such fragile creatures. She placed them near the modern glass fireplace, wrapping each in soft towels. "There," she murmured with an awkward attempt at comfort. "From now on, you three are my little snow princes." Their fur slowly fluffed as the heat seeped in, and for the first time since she found them, they stopped shaking. Emily exhaled, only now realizing how fast her heart had been beating. She settled onto the floor, still in her red coat, watching them with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. They were adorable, yet strangely silent, not barking or whining, only breathing shallow, quick breaths. As the hours passed and the storm raged outside, Emily dozed lightly beside the fire. The penthouse was wrapped in midnight silence, until one of the creatures lifted its tiny head. A sound rose from its throat, soft at first, almost a whisper. Then it stretched into a long, delicate note. Not a bark, not even a whine. A tiny, haunting howl, too ancient, too wild for a creature this small. Emily's eyes flew open, a chill crawling down her spine despite the fireplace's warmth. The creature's golden amber eyes reflected the firelight, sharp and strange, and the other two slowly mirrored its gaze. Emily sat frozen, breath caught in her throat. "Wait," she whispered, an uneasy shiver running through her. "Something's not right." And for the first time, the thought she'd been pushing away all night cracked through her mind. These were no ordinary puppies. Winter dragged on as though unwilling to release its grip on Denver, casting the entire city beneath layers of white that dulled sound and swallowed colors. Emily Carter's penthouse, normally a sanctuary of soft gold lighting and polished marble, now echoed constantly with the sharp, rhythmic tapping of claws across hardwood floors. The three tiny creatures she had rescued on that brutal night were no longer tiny at all. They grew at an astonishing pace, as if every sunrise added another inch to their limbs and another layer of wildness to their eyes. By late January, each one reached nearly to Emily's thigh, their bodies long and lean, their fur thickening into a silvery gray that shimmered when they passed under the ceiling lights. Their ears stood tall and alert, always angling toward even the faintest sound. Their eyes, those burning amber eyes, seemed to glow with an uncanny intelligence, watching everything with the focus of predators unlearning how to hide their nature. Despite their growing presence, they clung to Emily with fierce loyalty. When she crossed the living room, they glided behind her like three silent guardians. When she worked at her glass dining table, they curled at her feet, breathing slow and steady like synchronized shadows. And when she slept, They lay stretched across the rug beside her bed, their bodies forming a protective arc, as if warding off unseen dangers. Emily tried to continue life as usual, but their behavior pulled her gradually into a new routine. Their diet became one such challenge. She stocked her kitchen with high-end dog foods, grain-free kibble, organic chicken blends, freeze-dried lamb, whatever the pet boutique on 17th Street recommended. Yet the creatures barely touched them. Instead, they devoured raw meat with unnerving enthusiasm, their jaws snapping with precision, their teeth sharper than she remembered seeing on any puppy. They never barked, only let out low rumbles and peculiar chittering sounds that reminded her of something halfway between a growl and a whisper. Her friends, who loved visiting her glamorous penthouse, noticed immediately. One Friday evening, Sarah Lynn, an old college friend, stopped by with a bottle of wine. Sarah was a petite woman with warm, honey-toned skin and straight chestnut hair that fell just past her shoulders. She worked as a children's illustrator, her personality gentle and soothing, with a laugh that made people feel instantly welcomed. But even she hesitated when the three creatures approached her. They didn't sniff her or wag their tails. They simply stood in a triangular formation, unmoving, staring. Their gaze wasn't hostile but assessing, almost clinical, like they were deciding whether she was threat or prey. Sarah's smile faltered. "Emily, these aren't normal puppies." Emily forced a laugh. "They're just shy." But when Sarah reached out a cautious hand, all three lowered their heads slightly. Not growling, not, baring teeth, but watching with predator stillness. Sarah withdrew her hand immediately. "Okay," she murmured. "Shy. Sure." After Sarah left early, clearly unsettled, Emily sat on the floor where the firelight painted flickering gold across her red dress. The three creatures rested beside her, breathing in sync. She stroked their fur, whispering, "You're good boys. Just misunderstood, right?" They pressed into her touch, warm and soft, but their silence left a growing unease settling behind her ribs. The next turning point came on a night when the snow fell thicker than any before. The storm howled against the penthouse's tall glass windows, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of gold. Emily had stepped out of the shower, wrapping herself in a robe, when she noticed all three creatures perched on the built-in window seat. They sat perfectly still, tails straight, bodies tense, watching the swirling snow over Denver. Then, as if responding to some invisible signal, all three lifted their heads in unison. A long, low howl rose from their throats, a sound both beautiful and chilling, blending with the storm's wind until it was impossible to tell where the city ended and the wild began. The motion sensor lights on her balcony suddenly flickered on, bathing the snow in a pale glow. Emily froze, damp hair clinging to her shoulders. Something primal quivered inside her. This wasn't puppy behavior. This wasn't domestic. And deep down, she knew it. She tried to shake it off the next morning, convincing herself she was overthinking everything. Still, she bundled the three creatures into her SUV and drove through the slush-covered streets to the Riverside Veterinary Clinic. Inside, the warm lights buzzed softly. A middle-aged veterinarian named Dr. Harold Keating greeted her. Dr. Keating was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a rugged jawline marked by a faint scar across his chin, a relic from a dog rescue gone wrong when he was younger. Despite his rough appearance, he spoke with a calm steadiness that reassured anxious pet owners. But today, even he seemed thrown off. He examined each creature carefully, running his fingers along their spines, lifting their paws, checking their ears. His brows furrowed deeper with every minute. "Emily," he finally said, voice low, "I'm not sure what these are." She tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "They're dogs, right? Just unusual dogs." Dr. Keating straightened, studying her with eyes shaded by concern. "If you lived anywhere near the mountains," he said slowly, "I'd tell you to be careful. Because these—" He glanced at the three creatures, now sitting silently in the corner, like disciplined soldiers. "These look a lot more like wolves than puppies." Emily's breath caught. The room suddenly felt too small, the lights too bright. She stared at the creatures she had saved from the snow, the ones who followed her everywhere, who slept beside her bed. Wolves? Her wolves? But before she could respond, the creatures turned their amber eyes toward her, and something in that gaze made her shiver. The first touch of a truth she had never wanted to confront. The storm had weakened by morning, leaving behind a Denver coated in brilliant white, the sunlight glinting off every surface with a sharp, icy glare. Emily Carter stood in her garage, one hand resting on the sleek red SUV that had become her winter companion. Despite the cold, she was dressed in her signature winter ensemble, a deep red knit dress under a tailored scarlet coat, paired with tall black leather boots that framed her long, toned legs. She looked impossibly polished, as if stepping out of a winter fashion editorial rather than preparing for a trek into the snowy wilderness. But the three creatures circling her feet were anything but decorative. They had grown even more since the vet visit, now tall enough to reach her hip, their bodies honed, streamlined, and powerful. Their fur had thickened into layered gray coats streaked with shadowy undertones, more suited for wild terrain than penthouse life. Their tails swayed in anticipation, their ears perked, their amber eyes bright with a kind of restless hunger. Emily clipped the red leashes onto their harnesses, though they hardly needed guiding. The creatures seemed more aware of their surroundings than she was. She'd decided to bring them to the Evergreen Ridge Forest outside Denver, hoping the open snowfields would burn off their wild energy. Despite her growing unease, she clung to the belief that they were still hers, that affection could tame instinct. The drive took nearly an hour through winding mountain roads, passing the occasional pickup truck driven by rugged locals. One such driver, a man named Billy Hargrove, a broad-shouldered guy in his early 40s with weather-beaten skin, a graying beard, and a permanent squint from years of working as a snowplow operator, glanced into Emily's SUV at a stop sign. Billy, known for his blunt nature and distrust of anything unfamiliar, had survived a brutal winter landslide 5 years back, leaving him wary of the wilderness he worked in every day. When he spotted the three creatures inside her car, his eyebrows shot up. "Ma'am, those ain't dogs," he called out through his half-open window, his voice rough like gravel. Emily forced a polite smile, replying, "They're just unique." Billy shook his head slowly, unease etched across his weathered features. "Be careful out there," he muttered before driving off, his tone heavy with an unspoken warning. Emily swallowed hard, but continued onward until she reached the forest's edge. Evergreen Ridge was breathtaking under winter's rule. Towering pines bowed beneath layers of snow, long shadows stretching between tree trunks like fingers of an ancient creature. The air was crisp, painfully cold, and clean enough to sting her lungs with each breath. She stepped out, boots sinking into deep powder, her red coat blazing like fire against the boundless white. The creatures leapt out beside her, immediately alive, their movements flowing with eerie grace. They bounded, ahead, their paws barely making a sound. Their strides were long and efficient, every step a whisper, every adjustment a calculated motion. "Slow down," Emily called, half laughing, half fearful. They didn't slow. They scattered through the trees, reappearing in flashes of gray, circling her with predatory ease as though mapping the landscape. After several minutes of walking, they entered a secluded clearing where the snow lay untouched. Emily felt a prickle of worry at the sudden silence. No wind, no birds, nothing. Then she saw them, shapes moving at the far edge of the clearing. A group of coyotes emerged, their coats dusty brown and their eyes burning gold in the distance. There were 6 of them, lean and cautious, moving with the jittery confidence of scavengers ready to test their luck. Emily's breath hitched. She grabbed the red leashes, only to feel them rip free of her hands as the 3 creatures stepped forward. "No, wait," she whispered, but it was too late. Her 3 followed an invisible command, spreading themselves into a perfect line. Their hackles rose, fur bristling along their spines. They stood rigid, tails straight, ears high, their amber eyes blazing with a wild, magnetic authority. Emily felt her pulse surge painfully in her throat. She had never seen them like this, never witnessed them so utterly transformed. One of the 3, larger, with a darker streak running down its back, lifted its head toward the sky. And then it began. A howl, low, deep, primal, unfurled into the frozen air, vibrating through Emily's bones. The second joined, then the third, their harmonized voices layered atop each other, forming a haunting chord that rolled through the forest like an ancient song long forgotten. The coyotes froze, their ears flattened, bodies lowering instinctively. Then, as if acknowledging a superior presence, they backed away step by step, tails tucked, eyes lowered. Without a sound, they disappeared into the wall of snow-frosted trees. Emily stood trembling, her hands numb, the red leashes dangling uselessly from her fingers. She could only stare as the 3 creatures turned back toward her. They moved slowly, not with puppy-like excitement, but with deliberate, heavy purpose. Their eyes locked on her, amber, fierce, wild. Not the gaze of pets, the gaze of something older, stronger, untamed. And in that moment, as she stood in her brilliant red against the endless white, Emily Carter whispered into the still, frozen air. "No, it can't be. I'm raising wolves?" The 3 beings stopped only inches from her, their breaths misting the cold, their eyes glowing. They waited, watching her with a patience that felt unsettlingly human. It was as if they were silently asking her a question she wasn't ready to answer. "What will you do now?" Snow had begun falling again by the time Emily Carter returned to Denver, swirling softly against the windows of her penthouse like flakes of silent judgment. The city glittered beneath a pale sun, but to her the world felt unnervingly hollow. Her boots clicked sharply against the marble floor as she stepped inside, 3 gray shadows gliding silently beside her. The creatures, no longer the trembling bundles she had once rescued, moved with a poised, watchful confidence, their wild essence now impossible to deny. Each one towered nearly to her waist, their coats thick and lustrous, their amber eyes burning with the same intelligence she had witnessed in the forest. They were wolves, young, powerful, and deeply bonded to her. And yet, as they padded across the penthouse, Emily felt a heaviness in her chest that had nothing to do with their size. She knew what she had seen in the mountains, She knew what they were, and she knew what that meant for them. Her neighbors had begun noticing too. One afternoon, as she stepped into the hallway carrying grocery bags full of fresh meat, she caught her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Hughes, staring at her. Eleanor was a widowed, retired piano teacher in her late 60s, with silver hair pinned neatly behind her head and gentle lines etched into her face. Normally soft-spoken and kind, she was beloved in the building for her warm smile and habit of offering homemade cookies to anyone who passed by her door. But today, she looked worried. "Emily, dear," Eleanor murmured, voice trembling slightly. "Those animals of yours, they're getting quite large, aren't they?" Emily forced a smile. "Just growing fast. Big pups." Eleanor bit her lip, her pale blue eyes clouding with unease. "I've lived long enough to trust my instincts, and mine are telling me those aren't pups at all." Emily's throat tightened, and she retreated to her penthouse before the older woman could say anything more. Once inside, she collapsed onto the living room rug as the three wolves encircled her, pressing their warm bodies against hers. She buried her face in the thick fur of the largest one, its coat a striking mix of gray and charcoal, feeling tears burn her eyes. Despite everything, they were gentle with her, protective, loyal, and that was what hurt most. Later that night, sleep refused to come. Emily sat alone on the couch, wrapped in her red coat, staring at her laptop screen. Articles covered the display, stories about wolf hybrids, laws prohibiting their ownership, accounts of families forced to surrender animals they loved. The comment sections were full of fear and misinformation, painting wolves as monsters. She whispered into the empty room, "You're not monsters. You're mine." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. They didn't belong in a penthouse under artificial lights. They belonged in snow, deep forests, open spaces. And perhaps, she thought bitterly, not with her at all. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. She slept little, her eyes red-rimmed and hollowed by worry. The wolves watched her, sensing the shift in her emotional landscape. They followed her closer, pacing when she paced, curling beside her when she broke down crying at the kitchen counter. Finally, after one sleepless night spent sitting cross-legged on the floor, with all three wolves pressed into her lap, Emily made the call. Her voice shook as she spoke to the receptionist of the Silver Pines Wildlife Sanctuary, a remote haven for wolves deep in the northern mountains. The woman on the phone, Dana Whitlock, had a warm, steady voice. Dana was in her mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered from years of outdoor work, with sun-tanned skin and a collection of tiny scars on her hands from handling restless animals. Her personality was patient yet unyielding, a woman shaped by harsh winters and harsher truths. "We can take them," Dana assured. "They'll have space, a pack, freedom, and they'll be safe." Emily's tears fell silently as she whispered, "Thank you." The appointment was set. When the sanctuary's truck arrived a few days later, the snowfall was thick, turning the parking lot into a white battlefield. Two staff members stepped out. Dana herself, wrapped in a heavy parka, her braided brown hair dusted with frost, and a younger handler named Kevin Brooks. Kevin was a lean man in his late 20s with sandy blonde hair and an earnest face, his green eyes filled with a quiet compassion that came from rescuing animals since childhood. He moved with gentle precision, clearly accustomed to handling creatures that others feared. Together, they helped assemble the transport crate. Large, reinforced, safe. The wolves approached it calmly, almost knowingly, their tails low but relaxed. One by one, they stepped inside with a quiet acceptance that broke Emily's heart. As Kevin began closing the crate door, the largest wolf abruptly spun, leapt out, and circled Emily in a tight, frantic loop. It pressed its head into her red dress, letting out a soft, trembling growl that vibrated straight into her soul. The other two wolves watched tensely from inside the crate, their eyes bright with the same desperate emotion. Emily fell to her knees, wrapping her arms around the creature's thick neck. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into its fur. "I'm so sorry." Dana stepped forward, voice soft but firm. "They need to stay together. They're a bonded trio. If one refuses, none of them will go." Snowflakes clung to Emily's lashes as she looked up, the world spinning around her. Wolves, freedom, love, loss. A choice she didn't want to make. And there, in the howling white, with her red coat blazing against the storm, Emily placed her trembling hand on the wolf's head. Yet her answer remained unspoken. Weeks had passed since the sanctuary truck had rolled away from the Denver penthouse, carrying the three wolves who had once slept at Emily Carter's feet. Winter still gripped the mountains, but its sharpness felt different now, less like a threat and more like a reminder of the world she had chosen for them. She never told anyone the exact moment she made her decision. She barely remembered it herself. All she knew was that when she looked into their amber eyes that day, she understood that love demanded something larger than possession. It demanded release. The Silver Pines Wildlife Sanctuary sat deep in the northern ranges, surrounded by dense forests of towering pines and rugged cliffs carved by ancient winds. The sanctuary buildings were modest, a cluster of wooden cabins and equipment sheds, their roofs heavy with snow. But the land stretched endlessly behind them, a protected expanse where wolves could run without fear. When Emily arrived in her red SUV, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the drifts, turning the world into a painting of white and gold. She stepped out in her vivid red coat, boots sinking into the powder. The staff glanced at her with recognition. Few visitors ever looked so striking against the frozen landscape. Dana Whitlock, the sanctuary lead, approached first. The tall, strong-shouldered woman had frost clinging to the ends of her braided hair and wore a thick forest green jacket, her expression as calm as ever. "They've been waiting," Dana said with a faint smile, one of the rare ones she allowed herself. Standing beside her was another sanctuary team member, a young man named Javier Morales. Javier was in his early 30s, with warm bronze skin, dark curly hair tied in a short ponytail, and eyes the color of deep earth. Unlike Kevin, who had a gentle, quiet air, Javier radiated a grounded warmth. He'd grown up on a ranch in New Mexico, shaped by early mornings, hard work, and a deep respect for animals. A scar across his left eyebrow hinted at an accident involving a spooked horse during his teenage years, an event he often said taught him more about patience than any book could. "They're strong," Javier said. "Leaders. The others follow them now." Emily felt a surge of pride and sorrow entwined. "Leaders?" "Oh yes," Dana answered. "All three. They hunt together, move together. The rest of the pack watches them like they're royalty." Royalty. Emily exhaled shakily. It felt right. It hurt. But it felt right. Javier led her toward the observation ridge, a narrow trail overlooking one of the sanctuary's largest open valleys. Snow glistened across the expanse, untouched except for a few scattered paw prints. Pine branches bowed under the weight of frost. The world was silent except for the soft crunch of boots and the distant whisper of wind. When they reached the ridge, Javier raised a hand. "There," he murmured. Emily followed his gaze. 3 shapes moved far, across the valley, 3 streaks of gray slicing cleanly through the snow. Her heart leapt into her throat. They were bigger than she remembered, sleek, muscular, breathtaking in the wild. But the moment they spotted her red silhouette on the ridge, something shifted. The wolves stopped. Then, in perfect unison, they surged forward. They raced across the snow like 3 silver arrows, kicking up powder behind them. When they reached her, they slowed, heads lowering, bodies relaxed. Their amber eyes softened, not the razor-sharp stare of predators, but something gentler, something that remembered warmth and firelight, and a woman in red who had once carried them in her arms. One wolf brushed its face lightly against her thigh. Another sat close enough for its fur to catch on her coat, and the third let out a soft exhale that fogged in the cold air. Not pets, not entirely wild. Something in between, a strange, beautiful family. Emily laughed through the sting in her chest. "You 3, her voice cracked. "You really picked a better neighborhood this time." Dana chuckled behind her. "They've become the core of the northern pack. They bring down prey twice their size. They keep the boundaries safe." Javier added, "But every time it snows heavily, they come to that ridge over there." He pointed to a path leading toward the valley's edge, always looking down the road, like they're waiting for someone. Emily felt her breath tremble. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The wolves already knew. Evening crept in slowly, the sky turning lavender, then deep blue. Emily eventually said her goodbyes, though each step toward her SUV felt heavier than the last. When she started down the snowy road, headlights cutting through the dusk, she caught movement in her rearview mirror. The 3 wolves had climbed onto a high outcrop overlooking the sanctuary entrance. They stood tall, silhouettes against the fading sky. Then they lifted their heads. A long, unified howl rose into the night, haunting, powerful, woven with something like gratitude. It echoed across the valley, down the road, and straight into Emily's heart. She stopped the car. Stepping out into the falling snow, she looked up at them, the family she had saved, and the family she had set free. Tears warmed her frozen cheeks. She smiled, soft and sure. In the end, she felt no loss, only completion. She had fulfilled the promise she didn't know she'd made on that first stormy night. Rescue them, love them, then return them to the world they were born for, the world where they belonged. And somehow, in giving them their freedom, she found her own. Sometimes God sends his miracles wrapped in fur, hidden in storms, or disguised as moments we never expected. Emily thought she was saving 3 fragile lives in the snow, but perhaps it was heaven reminding her that love grows strongest when we give it away. In our everyday lives, whether in the noise of the city, the silence of an empty home, or the weight of ordinary routines, there are small signs of grace waiting for us, just like the 3 shadows in Emily's story. We don't always see them at first, but when we choose kindness, sacrifice, and courage, we walk a little closer to the light God intended for us. And maybe, just maybe, the howl that echoed through the winter forest wasn't only from the wolves, but a reminder from above that every act of compassion sends its own echo back into the world. If this story touched your heart, please share it, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more journeys of hope, loyalty, and the quiet miracles God still places in our path. May the Lord bless you, keep you warm through every storm, and may His grace follow you, just as faithfully as 3 wolves once followed a woman in red. God bless you.